She reached for the cheapest formula on the shelf. One cruel laugh shattered her already broken heart. The woman in designer heels had no idea who was watching from the parking lot. What happened next proved that sometimes justice comes from the most unexpected places. The breaking point. Grace Adeyemi stood in the fluorescent aisle of Savamart grocery, her worn canvas bag clutched against her chest. 28 years old, but the lines around her eyes told stories of sleepless nights and endless worry. Her hair, pulled back in a simple ponytail, hadn't seen a salon in 18 months. The faded jeans and oversized sweater she wore were donations from the church basement. Her fingers trembled as she compared prices on baby formula cans. 12,000 naira for the premium brand, 8,000 for the store brand, 5,000 for the one marked manager's special. Expires in 2 weeks. 5,000 naira. That leaves 3,000 for rice and beans. Enough for 4 days if I'm careful. The baby formula went into her basket. She didn't notice the weight of it, only the weight of everything else. 6 months ago, her sister had died in childbirth, leaving behind 3-month-old Emmanuel. Grace had promised at the hospital bedside, holding her sister's cooling hand, that she would raise the boy as her own. The promise had cost her everything. Her teaching assistant job at the university paid barely enough for one person. For two, it meant choices: formula or electricity, diapers or transportation, food or hope. Grace walked through Savamart like a ghost, invisible to the well-dressed shoppers filling their carts with imported wines and organic vegetables. She kept her eyes down, counting items twice, calculating constantly. The checkout line stretched ahead, and she joined it with her meager basket. The woman in front of her smelled like expensive perfume. Her cart overflowed with premium brands, fresh flowers, gourmet cheeses. Grace looked away, feeling the familiar ache of inadequacy settle in her chest. This is temporary, she told herself, the same lie she'd whispered for 6 months. Things will get better. But standing in that grocery store, holding discounted baby formula with 2 weeks until expiration, Grace couldn't imagine how. Victoria Okonkwo adjusted her Hermes scarf and checked her reflection in her phone screen. 42 years old, with skin maintained by weekly spa treatments and a face that had forgotten how to smile genuinely. Her Louis Vuitton bag cost more than most people earned in 3 months, and she made sure everyone knew it. She had married money, lots of it. Chief Okonkwo owned half the commercial real estate in Lagos, and Victoria wore her position like armor. The Mercedes G-Wagon in the parking lot, the diamonds on her fingers, the designer labels stitched into every garment. These were her credentials in a world she'd clawed her way into. But Victoria carried a secret that gnawed at her insides. She hadn't always been Mrs. Okonkwo. 20 years ago, she'd been Victoria Ease, a struggling secretary who'd used every weapon in her arsenal to trap a wealthy man into marriage. The memory of her own poverty terrified her so deeply that she'd become its cruelest enemy. Poor people reminded her of everything she'd escaped. Their existence was a mirror she couldn't bear to look into. In Savamart, she shopped not because she needed to, but because it amused her to be among common people. Her housekeeper usually handled groceries, but Victoria enjoyed these excursions. They reminded her that she'd won. She'd escaped. She was better. She piled imported cheeses into her cart, each block worth a week's wages for the tired-looking workers stocking shelves around her. Power, she'd learned, wasn't just about having money. It was about making sure others knew they didn't have it. Victoria's phone buzzed with a message from her husband. Dinner with the governor tonight. Wear the emerald necklace. She smiled. This was her life now. Governors and galas. Emeralds and influence. The woman behind her in line shifted, and Victoria caught a glimpse of worn shoes and bargain items. Her smile widened. Yes, she definitely won. The checkout line moved slowly. Grace shifted Emmanuel's weight in the fabric carrier strapped to her chest. The baby had fallen asleep, his small mouth making sucking motions in his dreams. She pressed a kiss to his forehead, breathing in his innocence. Next in line, please, the cashier called. Victoria stepped forward, her expensive handbag swinging. The cashier's demeanor changed immediately, straightening up, smiling wider. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Did you find everything you needed?" "Obviously," Victoria replied, not bothering to make eye contact. She scrolled through her phone while the cashier scanned items with nervous efficiency. Grace waited, watching the total climb on Victoria's register. 48,000 naira. 63,000. 87,000. For groceries. For 1 week. Don't look. Don't think about it. Your life is your own. Comparison is poison. But the poison was already in her system, had been for 6 months, would be there as long as poverty wrapped its fingers around her throat. Victoria's transaction finished with a beep. She inserted her platinum credit card without glancing at the total, gathered her bags, and moved aside. "Next customer, please." Grace stepped forward, placing her modest basket on the counter. 3 items. Baby formula marked down. A small bag of rice. A can of beans. The cashier scanned them mechanically. 13,200 naira. Grace pulled crumpled bills from her pocket, counting carefully. Her hands shook as she separated the notes. Behind her, she felt the weight of the growing line. Someone sighed impatiently. "Sorry," she whispered. "Just one moment." That's when she heard it. A laugh. Sharp and cold as broken glass. Victoria had stopped near the exit, ostensibly checking her receipt. But her eyes had locked onto Grace's basket. Specifically, onto the discounted baby formula with its bright yellow manager's special sticker. Expired formula? Victoria's voice carried across the checkout area. "You're feeding your baby expired formula?" The store seemed to hold its breath. Grace's face burned. "It's not expired. It expires in 2 weeks. It's perfectly what? Perfectly acceptable for poor people's children." Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking on the tile floor. "Do you know what happens when you feed babies substandard nutrition? Of course you don't. You probably can't even afford proper medical care." The other shoppers had stopped moving. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others watched with the horrible fascination people have for public suffering. Grace's throat closed. Emmanuel stirred against her chest, sensing her distress. She wanted to run, to disappear, to wake up in a different life. Her voice came out broken. "It's safe. The expiration date is irrelevant," Victoria interrupted. "What kind of mother are you? Can't even provide basic necessities. You shouldn't have children if you can't afford them properly." She turned to the gathering crowd, performing now. "This is what's wrong with this country. People having babies they can't feed, then expecting the rest of us to feel sorry for them." A few people nodded. Most looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Silence, Grace had learned, was just another form of cruelty. The cashier cleared her throat. "Ma'am, your total is—" "I heard it," Grace whispered. She pushed the money across the counter with trembling hands, grabbed her 3 items and fled. Behind her, she heard Victoria's laughter following like a curse. Outside, in the parking lot, Grace made it to the bus stop before the tears came. She collapsed onto the bench, clutching her bags and her baby, sobbing into Emmanuel's soft hair while strangers walked past pretending not to see. She didn't know that across the parking lot, in a black Range Rover with tinted windows, someone had witnessed everything. Daniel Chukwu sat in his vehicle with the engine running and his world tilting on its axis. He'd come to Savamart because his PA insisted he needed to understand how regular people shopped. Market research for the new discount retail chain his company planned to launch. He was supposed to observe, take notes, report back. Instead, he'd just watched a young mother get destroyed over baby formula. Daniel was 35, worth more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, and CEO of Chukwu Holdings, one of Nigeria's largest conglomerates. His suits cost fortunes. His watch could feed a family for a year. He'd built an empire from his late father's modest construction company, turning it into a powerhouse that touched everything from real estate to telecommunications. But sitting in that parking lot, watching the young woman sob on the bus stop bench, He wasn't thinking about business. He was thinking about his mother. 30 years ago, Patience Chukwu had stood in similar stores, counting similar coins, making similar impossible choices. Daniel remembered being 5 years old, watching his mother cry over a grocery receipt. Remembered her skipping meals so he and his siblings could eat. Remembered the shame in her eyes when she couldn't afford the school supplies his teachers demanded. His father had died when Daniel was 3, leaving Patience with 4 children and a mountain of debt. She'd worked 3 jobs, cleaning offices at night, selling vegetables during the day, doing laundry on weekends. She'd survived on dignity and determination when she had nothing else. Daniel had clawed his way out of poverty through scholarships and ruthless ambition. He'd promised his mother comfort in her old age, and he'd delivered. She lived in a mansion now, wanted for nothing. But he'd never forgotten where he came from. And he'd never stopped being angry at a world that crushed people like his mother under the weight of other people's cruelty. The woman on the bench, Grace, he'd heard the cruel woman call her, stood up slowly. She adjusted the baby on her chest, wiped her face with her sleeve, and walked toward the bus stop sign with her shoulders squared. Defeated but not broken. Something in Daniel's chest tightened. He pulled out his phone and called his head of security. Marcus, I need you to find out everything about someone. Young woman, late 20s, has a baby. Just left Savamart on Victoria Island. Discreetly. I don't want her to know. Sir. Just do it. And Marcus, also find out about the woman in the Mercedes G-Wagon. License plate Lagos KJA 785FC. The one in the designer clothes who just came out. What's this about, boss? Daniel watched Grace board a Danfo bus, disappearing into the chaos of Lagos traffic. It's about remembering who we are, he said quietly, and making sure cruelty doesn't win. He ended the call and sat in silence for a long moment. The afternoon sun glinted off the Savamart windows. Inside, people continued their shopping, unaware that something had shifted, that a moment of cruelty had been witnessed by someone with the power to respond. Daniel Chukwu had built his empire on calculated decisions and strategic investments. But what he was about to do had nothing to do with business. It had everything to do with the memory of his mother's tears and the sound of a stranger's laughter. Grace Adeyemi had no idea her life was about to change. But in that parking lot, in that moment, the wheels of destiny began to turn. And Victoria Okonkwo had no idea. She'd just made the worst mistake of her life. The invisible hand. Grace's room in Surulere was exactly 12 feet by 10 feet. She'd measured it once, trying to calculate if there was any way to make it feel larger. There wasn't. A narrow bed pushed against one wall. A hot plate on a wooden crate. A plastic basin for washing. Emmanuel's crib, donated from the church, took up precious space near the single window that looked out onto a courtyard where neighbors hung laundry and children played football. The rent was 50,000 naira monthly. Grace paid it with money she scraped together from her university job and weekend tutoring. This month, after buying Emmanuel's formula and the medical checkup he'd needed, she was 8,000 naira short. She'd have to ask Mrs. Ajamosu, her landlady, for an extension. Again. 3 days after the Savamart incident, Grace sat on her bed counting coins while Emmanuel slept. Her phone buzzed, a message from her colleague, Tund, at the university. Grace, can you cover my morning class tomorrow? My daughter is sick. I'll split the payment with you. She typed back immediately. Yes. What time? 7 a.m. Introduction to Literature. Thank you. An extra 2,000 naira. Enough to buy another can of formula when this one ran out. Grace set her phone down and closed her eyes, fighting the exhaustion that lived in her bones. This is temporary. Things will get better. Keep faith. But faith was expensive when you were this tired. A knock at the door startled her. Mrs. Ajamosu, probably coming for rent. Grace stood, rehearsing excuses, and opened the door. No one was there. Instead, a package sat on the doorstep. Brown paper, tied with string, with her name written in neat handwriting across the top. Grace looked up and down the corridor. Empty. She picked up the package, brought it inside and carefully unwrapped it. Inside, 3 cans of premium baby formula. The expensive brand. The one that cost 12,000 naira per can. And a note, handwritten on cream-colored paper. For Emmanuel. Every child deserves the best. You are doing better than you know. A friend. Grace's hands shook as she read the note 3 times. 4 times. Who? How? Why? She checked the formula cans carefully. Sealed, unexpired, genuine. 36,000 naira worth of formula. Enough for 6 weeks. The tears came again, but these were different. These tasted like hope. Marcus delivered the file to Daniel's office the next morning. A thin folder containing everything there was to know about Grace Adeyemi. Daniel read it at his desk, while rain pattered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office. Grace Adeyemi, 28. Bachelor's degree in English literature from University of Lagos. Had been working on a master's degree before her sister's death. Now employed as a teaching assistant, earning 70,000 naira monthly. Raising her nephew alone. No parents. They died in a car accident when she was 19. No other family. Her sister, Blessing, had died from eclampsia complications. The hospital had demanded payment before treatment. By the time Grace had scraped the money together, it was too late. Daniel closed the file and stared out at Lagos stretching below him. Millions of people. Millions of stories like Grace's. Quiet tragedies unfolding in rooms too small, with hope too fragile. The second file was thinner. Victoria Okonkwo, 42. Married to Chief Okonkwo. No job, no children. Spent her days at spas and boutiques and charity galas where she posed for photographs while contributing nothing of substance. But the interesting part was further down. Before her marriage, Victoria had been a secretary at a law firm. Salary barely above minimum wage. She'd married Chief Okonkwo 3 months after meeting him at a client dinner. The chief's first wife had died the year before. Victoria had escaped poverty by marrying it away. And now she spent her days punishing people who reminded her of what she'd been. Daniel understood her, which made him despise her more. He picked up his phone and called his assistant. Chioma, I need you to arrange something. Anonymously. I'll send you the details. Sir. And Chioma? This doesn't go through company accounts. Use my personal funds. No paper trail. Of course, sir. Daniel hung up and opened his laptop. He began typing instructions, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The plan forming in his mind wasn't about grand gestures. It was about consistent, quiet support. The kind that built dignity instead of dependence. His mother had taught him that. When they'd been poor, the worst charity was the kind that made you feel small. The best help came from people who understood that poverty wasn't a moral failing. It was a circumstance that dignity and opportunity could overcome. Grace needed opportunity. Daniel was going to make sure she had it, without ever knowing where it came from. Over the next 3 weeks, Grace's life shifted in small, inexplicable ways. The formula was the first gift. Then, a week later, an envelope appeared under her door containing 10,000 naira and another note. For the rent you're worried about. Your struggle is seen. Your strength is admired. Grace reported it to Mrs. Ajamosu, who shrugged. Someone must be looking out for you. Take the blessing, child. God works in mysterious ways. But was it God? Or was it something else? Grace didn't know whether to feel grateful or afraid. Anonymous gifts felt like fairy tales, and fairy tales always came with prices. Still, when the money paid her rent arrears, and she didn't have to choose between electricity and food that week, gratitude won. The third gift came 2 weeks later. A box delivered to the university office, addressed to her. Inside, a laptop. Not new, but refurbished and perfect. And another note. For your studies. Don't give up on your dreams. The world needs educated, compassionate people like you. Grace sat in the shared office, staring at the laptop, while Tund looked over her shoulder. Someone has a guardian angel, he said, whistling low. Do you know who's sending these? No. Grace ran her fingers over the keyboard. I don't understand why anyone would. Maybe you helped someone once. Karma, you know? What goes around. Tund patted her shoulder. Use it for your thesis. You were brilliant before. Everything happened. You could still finish your master's. Grace had abandoned her thesis 6 months ago. No time, no money, no energy. But holding this laptop, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Possibility. That night, after putting Emmanuel to bed, she opened the laptop and pulled up her thesis files from her old computer. Resilience in African Women's Literature, Narratives of Survival and Dignity. The title felt prophetic now. She began to type. Victoria heard about the teaching assistant with the mysterious benefactor from her friend Ngozi, whose daughter attended the university. Apparently this girl was practically begging on the streets, and now she's suddenly getting gifts? Laptop, money, baby supplies? Something's not right. Probably sleeping with some married man who's keeping her. They sat in the VIP section of a new restaurant, sipping champagne that costs more than Grace's monthly salary. Victoria's interest sharpened. What's her name? Grace something. Adeyemi, I think. Ngozi waved her hand dismissively. One of those girls who think having a degree makes them special when they're still common. Grace. The name rang a bell. Victoria scrolled through her mental catalog of insignificant people she'd encountered, and then it clicked. Savamart. The girl with the expired formula. The one she'd publicly humiliated. A slow smile spread across Victoria's face. So the little church mouse was getting help? From whom? And why did it bother Victoria so much? Because poor people were supposed to stay poor. That was the natural order. When they started rising, when they started improving, it disrupted the hierarchy that made Victoria feel safe. I think I know this girl, Victoria said slowly. She's exactly the type to manipulate some man into supporting her. Probably playing the tragic orphan card. You know her. I've observed her. She's a nobody trying to become somebody. Victoria set down her champagne flute with a sharp click. I think someone needs to remind her where she belongs. Ngozi leaned forward, eyes glittering. She loved drama the way some people loved oxygen. What are you thinking? I'm thinking that common girls should stay in their common places. And if no one else will teach her that lesson. Victoria's smile turned cruel. Then I will. She didn't know why it mattered so much. Why this particular girl's small improvements felt like personal insults. But deep in Victoria's chest, where she kept her terror of returning to poverty, Grace's rising trajectory felt like a threat. If Grace could escape, what did that say about Victoria's own escape? If dignity and education and hard work could elevate people, then Victoria's method, manipulation and marriage, looked less like triumph and more like what it was. Survival through transaction rather than merit. And Victoria couldn't bear to examine that truth. So instead, she would tear down the girl who reflected it back at her. Grace's thesis progressed slowly but steadily. Between teaching, caring for Emmanuel, and the tutoring job she couldn't afford to quit, she carved out midnight hours for writing. The laptop hummed quietly in the dark room, its glow the only light as her fingers moved across the keys. She was analyzing Buchi and Makita's, The Joys of Motherhood, when the fourth gift arrived. This time it was delivered directly to her at the university. A large box, professionally wrapped, with her name on a card. Inside, a collection of academic books. Texts she'd needed for her thesis but couldn't afford. First editions, expensive, with marginalia from previous scholarly owners. The note read, "Knowledge is power. Your mind is your greatest asset. Keep shining." Grace looked up to find Professor Adebayo, the head of the English department, watching her from his office door. "May I?" He gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Of course, sir." Professor Adebayo was in his 60s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been sympathetic when Grace had dropped out of the master's program, had even offered to hold her place for when she was ready to return. "I've been hearing interesting things, Ms. Adeyemi. You're working on your thesis again?" "Yes, sir. At night mostly. I hope to finish it, even if I can't officially continue the program right now. And if you could? Continue the program. Grace's throat tightened. I can't afford the tuition, sir. Not while I'm supporting Emmanuel. Professor Adebayo nodded slowly. What if I told you a private scholarship has become available, specifically for single mothers pursuing advanced degrees? It would cover your tuition and provide a monthly stipend for living expenses. The room tilted. Grace gripped the edge of her desk. What? An anonymous donor established it this semester. Very specific criteria. You're the only candidate who qualifies. He slid a folder across the desk. The donor specified that the recipient shouldn't feel beholden. The only requirement is that you finish your degree and someday, help someone else the way you've been helped. Grace opened the folder with trembling hands. The scholarship details were printed on official letterhead. Tuition covered. 15,000 naira monthly stipend. 2-year duration with possibility of renewal. Why? She whispered. Why me? Perhaps someone sees what I see. A brilliant, dedicated young woman who deserves a chance. Professor Adebayo stood. Think about it. You have until next week to accept. After he left, Grace sat in shock. For gifts. Each one addressing exactly what she needed. Formula, rent money, laptop, academic books, and now this. A scholarship that would change everything. Who are you? She thought, staring at the scholarship papers. And why do you care? Across the city, in his office, Daniel read Marcus's latest report confirming that Grace had received the scholarship notification. He allowed himself a small smile. His mother used to say that angels walked among humans, invisible until they chose to reveal themselves. Daniel didn't believe in angels, but he believed in action, in using power for something other than accumulation. Grace was brilliant. Her thesis proposal, which Professor Adebayo had shared, with Grace's permission, secured through careful intermediaries, was insightful and well-researched. She deserved to finish her education. She deserved opportunities that weren't crushed under the weight of poverty and bad luck. This wasn't charity. It was investment in potential that would have flourished anyway if the world were fair. Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Coming for dinner Sunday? I'm making your favorite. He smiled and replied, Wouldn't miss it, Mama. Later, over his mother's jollof rice and stew, Daniel would tell her what he'd been doing. She would cry and call him her blessing, and he would remember why he'd worked so hard to build his empire. Not for himself. For moments like this. For the ability to be the help he'd wished for when his mother had cried over grocery receipts. For the power to prove that kindness wasn't weakness. It was the strongest force in the world. Grace accepted the scholarship. How could she not? Professor Adebayo announced it at a department meeting, and her colleagues congratulated her with genuine warmth. Tund hugged her. I told you things would turn around. You deserve this, Grace. But not everyone was happy. News traveled fast through the university's social networks. Within days, it reached Ngozi's daughter, who mentioned it to her mother, who called Victoria immediately. You won't believe this. That Grace girl? She got some mysterious scholarship. Full tuition, stipend, everything. Someone's definitely keeping her. Victoria's hand tightened around her phone. Scholarship. Anonymous donor, apparently. Very convenient, isn't it? Girl with no connections suddenly has some secret sponsor. Ngozi's voice dripped with implication. I wonder what she's doing to earn it. After the call ended, Victoria sat in her empty mansion, surrounded by expensive furniture and cheap thoughts. The girl was rising, improving, escaping. It felt personal. It felt like mockery, like the universe laughing at Victoria's carefully constructed superiority. She needed to do something, to remind Grace, and herself, that some people belonged at the bottom. Victoria made 3 phone calls. The first to her husband's cousin, who sat on the university's board. The second to a friend who owned several popular blogs. The third to her lawyer. By the time she finished, she was smiling again. If Grace wanted to play Cinderella, Victoria would make sure the glass slipper shattered. The accusation came on a Tuesday morning. Grace arrived at the department office to find Professor Adebayo waiting with the university's security chief and the bursar, Mrs. Ojo. Their faces were grim. "Ms. Adeyemi, we need to discuss something serious," Professor Adebayo said. He looked pained. "Please sit." Grace's stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" Mrs. Ojo opened a folder. 3 days ago, 15,000 naira went missing from the department's petty cash. The money was in a locked drawer in this office. You have keys to this office. Yes, but I didn't take any money. Why would I? There's also the matter of a laptop that was checked out to you through the department's equipment loan program. The security chief leaned forward. A colleague reported seeing you with the personal laptop. New model. Rather expensive for someone in your circumstances. The gifts. They were using the gifts against her. "That laptop was given to me," Grace said, panic rising. "A gift. I didn't steal." "A gift from whom?" Mrs. Ojo's tone was skeptical. "Can this person verify the gift?" "I don't know who sent it. It came anonymously, but I would never." "Convenient. An anonymous benefactor." The security chief exchanged glances with Mrs. Ojo. "Ms. Adeyemi, we've also received reports that you've been living beyond your means. New baby supplies, paid rent, expensive academic books. Where is this money coming from?" "I told you someone has been helping me. I don't know who, but I haven't stolen anything." Professor Adebayo raised his hand. "Please, let's not jump to conclusions. Grace has been with us for 3 years. She's never given any indication of dishonesty." "People get desperate," Mrs. Ojo said coldly. "Single mother, financial pressures, sudden improvement in circumstances. It's a clear pattern. I'm recommending immediate suspension pending investigation." "No." Grace stood abruptly, Emmanuel's carrier strapped to her chest. The baby woke and began to cry. "Please, I need this job. I didn't take any money. Please, you have to believe me." But she could see it in their faces. They'd already decided. Poor girl, sudden windfall, missing money. The equation was simple in their minds. "We'll need you to surrender your keys and laptop for inspection," the security chief said. "And you're suspended without pay until the investigation concludes." Grace's world collapsed. No job meant no income. No income meant no rent, no formula, no food. The scholarship would be revoked. Everything she'd started to build would crumble. She walked out of the office in a daze, Emmanuel crying against her chest, her keys and laptop left behind. In the hallway, she saw colleagues whispering, watching. The accusation had already spread. Outside, Grace sat on a bench under an almond tree and finally let herself break. She had no one to call. No family to turn to. No resources to fight back. "This is how it ends," she thought. "This is how the world crushes people like me." She didn't know that in a gleaming office across the city, Daniel's phone was ringing with an urgent call from Professor Adebayo. "Mr. Chukwu, we have a problem. Someone is framing Grace Adeyemi for theft. I think you need to know about this immediately." Daniel listened to Professor Adebayo's explanation with cold fury building in his chest. "How did they connect me to the scholarship?" he asked quietly. "They didn't. I haven't told anyone. But I knew something was wrong with this accusation. Grace isn't capable of theft. Someone is sabotaging her, and I thought, given your interest in her welfare, you might want to know." "Who made the accusation?" "That's the interesting part." Mrs. Ojo received an anonymous tip. But the tip included very specific information about Grace's recent improvements. Almost like someone had been watching her. Daniel's mind worked quickly. The woman from Savamart. The Mercedes. He'd had Marcus keep passive tabs on Victoria Okonkwo. She'd been asking questions about Grace at society functions, through her social network. "I need security footage from the department office for the past week," Daniel said. "Can you arrange that?" "I can try. But Daniel, even if we prove she didn't take the money, the damage to her reputation." Let me handle it. Just get me that footage. Daniel hung up and immediately called Marcus. I need everything on Victoria Okonkwo. Social media, phone records if you can get them legally, financial transactions. Something connects her to this accusation against Grace. Find it. Boss, if we're investigating someone's personal life. Find it, Daniel repeated, his voice steel. And Marcus? I want to know every member of the university's board. Particularly anyone connected to Chief Okonkwo. On it. 24 hours later, the picture was clear. Victoria had called her husband's cousin, board member Charles Okonkwo, the day before the accusation emerged. Charles had called Mrs. Ojo. Mrs. Ojo had discovered the missing money immediately after. The security footage showed something else entirely. A cleaning staff member entering the office late at night, removing money from the drawer, then returning it to a different location. Further investigation revealed that this staff member had deposited 5,000 naira into her account the next day. Payment for a service rendered. Victoria had orchestrated everything. Daniel sat in his office watching the security footage on his laptop and made a decision. The time for anonymous help was over. Grace needed active defense, and she needed to know she wasn't alone. More than that, Victoria Okonkwo needed to learn that cruelty had consequences. Daniel picked up his phone and made a call he'd been avoiding. Professor Adebayo, I'm coming to the university tomorrow. It's time we had a public conversation about justice and false accusations. And Grace? Grace is about to learn that someone has been watching over her. And why? The emergency department meeting was called for Friday morning. Grace received notification through email, instructing her to attend. No explanation given. She arrived with Emmanuel, having no one to leave him with, wearing her only professional outfit, a plain dress she'd owned for 4 years. Her eyes were swollen from crying, her dignity hanging by threads. The conference room was full. Professor Adebayo, Mrs. Ojo, the security chief, several other faculty members, and inexplicably, a man in an expensive suit she didn't recognize. Daniel Chukwu stood by the window, watching her enter. This was the first time he'd seen Grace up close since the parking lot. She looked exhausted, terrified, and heartbreakingly dignified despite everything. Ms. Adeyemi, please sit, Professor Adebayo said gently. Grace sat, holding Emmanuel close. I don't understand why. We owe you an apology, Professor Adebayo cut in. And an explanation. He gestured to Daniel. This is Mr. Daniel Chukwu. He has information relevant to your case. Daniel stepped forward. Ms. Adeyemi, 3 days ago you were accused of theft. The accusation was false. I have proof. He connected his laptop to the conference room projector. The security footage played, showing the cleaning staff member entering the office, manipulating the cash drawer, clearly following instructions. This woman was paid 5,000 naira to create the appearance of theft, Daniel continued. The money was never actually stolen. It was moved to make you look guilty. Grace stared at the screen, unable to process. But who would do that? Why? Because someone wanted to destroy your credibility and your scholarship. Daniel clicked to another slide showing phone records, carefully redacted to show only relevant information. The accusation originated with Mrs. Victoria Okonkwo, who coordinated with board member Charles Okonkwo and pressured the bursar to act quickly before any real investigation could occur. Mrs. Ojo shifted uncomfortably. I was following up on a credible tip. You were following up on a vendetta, Daniel said coldly. And you nearly destroyed an innocent woman's life without due diligence. Professor Adebayo spoke up. Grace, the university offers its deepest apologies. Your suspension is lifted immediately with back pay. Your reputation is fully restored. Grace looked between them, confusion and relief warring on her face. I don't understand. How do you know all this, Mr. Chukwu? Why would you investigate? Daniel moved to sit across from her, his expression softening. Because I was there, Ms. Adeyemi. 3 weeks ago in the Savamart parking lot. I saw what Victoria Okonkwo did to you. I saw her cruelty. And I decided that if no one else would stand up for you, I would. The room went silent. Grace's eyes widened. You were. It was you? The gifts? The scholarship? Yes. But why? You don't know me. Why would you? Daniel's voice was quiet but firm. Because 30 years ago, my mother stood in stores like Savamart, counting coins and absorbing cruelty from people who thought their money made them better. Because I know what it's like to watch someone you love suffer from poverty that isn't their fault. And because when I saw you on that bus stop bench crying but not broken, I saw the same strength my mother had. The kind of strength that deserves support, not punishment. Tears streamed down Grace's face. Emmanuel cooed softly, oblivious to the moment unfolding around him. The gifts, the scholarship, they weren't charity, Daniel continued. They were recognition. You're brilliant. Your thesis proposal is excellent. Your dedication to your nephew despite impossible circumstances shows character that can't be bought or taught. I simply removed some obstacles so your talent could shine. I don't know what to say, Grace whispered. Say you'll finish your degree. Say you'll keep being exactly who you are. And say you'll remember, when you're successful, to be the help you needed for someone else who needs it. Grace nodded, unable to speak, crying openly now. Professor Adebayo passed her a box of tissues while other faculty members looked away, some wiping their own eyes. Mrs. Ojo cleared her throat. I apologize, Ms. Adeyemi. I should have investigated more thoroughly before acting. And Victoria Okonkwo? Grace finally asked. What happens to her? Daniel's expression hardened. That's a different conversation. One that's about to happen publicly. The event was a charity gala, organized by the Lagos Business Council to raise funds for educational initiatives. Daniel sat on the council's board. He'd specifically requested that Grace be invited as the scholarship recipient being honored. The invitation arrived at Grace's room 3 days after her vindication. Heavy cardstock, gold lettering, and a handwritten note from Daniel. You deserve to celebrate your achievements. Come as my guest. Show them who you are. Also in the envelope, a gift card to a boutique and salon. Grace stared at the invitation for hours. A gala. With wealthy people and influential families. She didn't belong in that world. She'd be conspicuous, uncomfortable, judged. But then again, she'd been judged in Savamart. And she'd survived. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. She used the gift card the next day, feeling strange as the boutique staff treated her with respect. They helped her choose a simple but elegant dress in deep blue. The salon styled her hair. And for the first time in years, Grace looked in the mirror and saw someone who didn't look defeated. She saw someone who looked strong. The night of the gala, she left Emmanuel with Mrs. Ajamosu, who'd become unexpectedly supportive after hearing about Grace's vindication. Go shine, child. Show them what real class looks like. Grace arrived at the 5-star hotel venue in a taxi, clutching her small handbag and fighting the urge to run. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers, filled with people in designer clothes discussing business deals over champagne. And standing by the entrance watching for her was Daniel Chukwu. He smiled when he saw her. Miss Adeyemi, you look wonderful. I feel like an imposter, she admitted. You're the most genuine person here, he replied. Trust me. Come, let me introduce you. He guided her through the crowd, introducing her to business leaders and philanthropists, describing her research and her resilience. Grace spoke hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. These people listened. They asked questions. They treated her like she mattered. She was discussing her thesis with the university vice-chancellor when she saw her. Victoria Okonkwo, across the ballroom, wearing diamonds and designer silk. Their eyes met. Victoria's face went white. Victoria had attended the gala out of obligation, expecting a boring evening of fake smiles and business talk. She hadn't expected to see the girl from Savamart wearing an evening dress and speaking with the vice-chancellor. And she definitely hadn't expected to see Daniel Chukwu, one of Lagos's most eligible bachelors and powerful businessmen, staying close to that same girl like a protective shadow. Victoria's mind raced. How did this nobody know Daniel Chukwu? Why was she here? What was happening? Ngozi appeared at her elbow, eyes wide. Is that the teaching assistant? What is she doing here? I don't know, Victoria said slowly. But unease crawled up her spine. Something was wrong. This girl should be suspended, disgraced, unemployed. Not standing in a ballroom looking confident. As if sensing her gaze, Daniel turned. His eyes found Victoria across the room. And his expression turned to ice. He said something to Grace, who nodded. Then he began walking directly toward Victoria, cutting through the crowd with purpose. Victoria's pulse quickened. She pasted on a smile. Mr. Chukwu, what a pleasure. Mrs. Okonkwo. Daniel's voice was cordial but cold. I've been hoping to speak with you. Oh. About what? About cruelty. About using influence to destroy innocent people. About the consequences of your actions. The blood drained from Victoria's face. Around them, conversations quieted as people sensed drama. I don't know what you mean, Victoria said, but her voice wavered. I think you do. 3 weeks ago, you humiliated a young mother in Savamart for buying discounted baby formula. Last week, you orchestrated a false theft accusation against that same woman to destroy her scholarship and employment. Daniel's voice remained calm, but it carried through the ballroom. You used your husband's family connections to manipulate university administration into suspending her without proper investigation. Victoria's mouth opened and closed. People were staring now. Ngozi stepped back, distancing herself. That's absurd. I did no such thing. Who told you these lies? Security footage, phone records, bank transactions, witness statements. Daniel gestured to Grace, who stood frozen across the room. And the testimony of a woman who has more dignity in her little finger than you've had in your entire life. She's a nobody. The words burst out of Victoria before she could stop them. A common girl with a baby she can't afford, trying to rise above her station. Her station? Daniel's voice sharpened. And what station is that, Mrs. Okonkwo? The one where people work 3 jobs to survive. Where they raise children alone after family tragedy. Where they pursue education despite impossible obstacles. That station. Victoria realized her mistake too late. The crowd was watching, judging. And not in her favor. Or perhaps you mean the station you came from, Daniel continued quietly. Before you married money. Before you forgot what it feels like to count coins and absorb other people's cruelty. Victoria's carefully constructed world cracked. How dare you? I dare because someone needs to say it. Wealth doesn't make you better than anyone. It just makes you louder. Daniel turned to address the room. This woman used her privilege to try and destroy someone who had done nothing wrong. Because that person's poverty reminded her of something she wanted to forget. That's not strength. It's cowardice. The ballroom was completely silent now. Victoria looked around desperately but found no allies. Even Ngozi had melted into the crowd. Chief Okonkwo materialized at his wife's side, his face furious. Victoria, what is he talking about? Nothing, darling. He's confused. Is it true? The chief's voice was deadly quiet. Did you involve my cousin in some vendetta against a university employee? Victoria's silence was answer enough. The chief's jaw tightened. We're leaving. Now. He turned to Daniel. Mr. Chukwu, my apologies for my wife's behavior. I'll be addressing this personally. As they walked toward the exit, Victoria heard the whispers starting. Saw the phones coming out. By morning, the story would be everywhere. Her reputation, the carefully curated image she'd built, was crumbling. At the ballroom doors, she turned back to look at Grace one more time. The girl stood beside Daniel, looking not triumphant but sad. And somehow that was worse than any gloating could have been. After Victoria's departure, the gala's energy shifted. Conversations resumed, but many people approached Grace now, offering congratulations on her scholarship and condolences for what she'd endured. Daniel led her to a quieter corner, near the balcony overlooking Lagos's glittering night skyline. "I'm sorry you had to be part of that," he said. "I know public confrontation isn't comfortable." "She needed to hear it," Grace replied softly. "But I don't feel victorious. I feel sad for her. She's so afraid of being poor again that she's made herself poor in other ways." Daniel studied her face. "That's remarkably compassionate, considering what she tried to do to you. My mama used to say that hurt people hurt people. Victoria must be hurting inside to be so cruel outside." Grace looked out at the city. "I don't want to become bitter like her, no matter what I've been through." "You won't. That's not who you are." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Grace turned to him. "Why did you really do all this? The full truth. It can't just be because you saw me crying in a parking lot." Daniel took a breath. "My mother was a widow with 4 children. My father died when I was 3, leaving her with nothing but debts. She worked herself to exhaustion keeping us fed and in school. I remember being 7 years old, watching her cry over a grocery receipt because she'd miscalculated and couldn't afford bread." His voice grew rough with emotion. "I remember her coming home from cleaning office buildings at midnight, her knees bleeding because she'd scrubbed floors all day. I remember the way people looked at us, like we were less human because we were poor." Grace listened, her heart breaking for the boy he'd been. "When I was 12, Mama got sick. The hospital wouldn't treat her without payment up front. I begged. I literally got on my knees and begged them to help her. They refused." He closed his eyes. "She survived because a stranger, a doctor who'd been watching, paid the bill anonymously. We never knew who. Mama called him her angel." "That's why you helped me anonymously," Grace whispered. "That's why I had to help. Because I was that child watching his mother suffer. Because I know what it's like to be powerless in the face of someone else's cruelty." He opened his eyes and they were bright with unshed tears. "When I saw Victoria mock you, when I saw you crying on that bench but then standing up to catch your bus anyway, I saw my mother. And I couldn't walk away." Grace's own tears fell freely now. "I don't know how to thank you. Finish your degree. Raise Emmanuel to be kind. Help someone else someday. That's thanks enough." He smiled. "And maybe let me be part of your journey? Not as some mysterious benefactor, but as a friend." "I'd like that," Grace said. "I'd like that very much." The gala continued around them, but in that moment on that balcony, 2 people who'd both known poverty and pain found something neither had expected. Hope. Connection. The beginning of something that felt like healing. The next 3 weeks were brutal for Victoria Okonkwo. The story spread through Lagos's social circles like wildfire. Videos from the gala circulated online. Bloggers picked up the story. "Rich woman exposed for destroying poor mother's life," read the headlines. Her friends stopped calling. Invitations to events dried up. At the boutiques and salons where she'd once been treated like royalty, staff were now coolly polite but distant. Chief Okonkwo was furious. The scandal had touched his business reputation. His cousin Charles was forced to resign from the university board. The chief's political aspirations suffered collateral damage. "You've embarrassed me, Victoria," he said one evening in their mansion that suddenly felt like a prison. "You've embarrassed my family. All because you couldn't let some girl be. I didn't mean. You never mean anything. You just do whatever makes you feel superior without thinking about consequences." He stood. "I'm sleeping in the guest house. I need to decide if this marriage is worth the embarrassment you've caused." Alone in her mansion, surrounded by expensive things that suddenly meant nothing, Victoria finally looked at herself honestly. She'd been cruel because she was afraid. Afraid that if poor people could rise, it meant her own rise hadn't been special. Afraid that if dignity came from character instead of money, she had none. She'd spent 20 years running from her past, and in doing so, she'd become something worse than poor. She'd become empty. Victoria sat on her designer sofa in her luxury living room and cried for the first time in years. Not performative tears but real ones. Mourning for the woman she could have been if she hadn't let fear turn her into a monster. 6 months later, Grace defended her master's thesis to a panel of professors who praised her research as groundbreaking and deeply humane. She graduated with distinction, Emmanuel in the audience with Mrs. Ajamosu and Tund. Daniel sat in the back row beaming with pride. The scholarship had done more than cover tuition. It had given Grace confidence. She'd published 2 papers from her thesis. She'd been offered a full-time teaching position at the university. She'd moved into a 2-bedroom apartment with space for Emmanuel to play. But more than her circumstances had changed. Grace had changed. She no longer apologized for existing. She held her head high. She spoke up in meetings. She'd started a small foundation to help single mothers afford childcare so they could continue their education. The foundation's first donor? Daniel Chukwu. The second? Professor Adebayo. The third, surprisingly, was an anonymous contribution of 50,000 naira with a note that simply said, "From someone learning to be better." Grace suspected it was Victoria, though she never confirmed it. Daniel had become a constant presence in her life, not as a benefactor anymore, but as a friend who'd become something more. They had dinner weekly, discussing books and business and raising children. He brought Emmanuel toys and treated the boy like family. "You know people are talking," Grace said one evening over jollof rice in her new apartment. "About us. Let them talk." Daniel smiled. "I learned a long time ago that the only opinions that matter are the ones from people who've earned the right to have them. And what do you think about us?" He set down his fork and looked at her seriously. "I think you're the strongest person I've ever met. I think Emmanuel is lucky to have you. And I think I'm lucky you let me into your life. Even though I come with baggage?" "Grace, everyone comes with baggage. The question is whether you're willing to help each other carry it." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I'd like to keep helping you carry yours. If you'll let me." She squeezed his hand, smiling through tears. "I'd like that. But only if you let me help carry yours too. Deal?" Emmanuel, sitting in his high chair, banged his spoon happily, as if celebrating the moment. Scene 19. Full circle a year after the Savamart incident, Grace stood in a grocery store with Emmanuel, now walking and babbling constantly, holding her hand. She was buying formula again, but this time without counting coins. Her cart contained fresh vegetables, quality protein, books for Emmanuel. She could afford these things now, not because someone was helping her, but because she'd earned them. At the checkout, the young woman in front of her fumbled with her wallet, clearly short on cash. The cashier sighed impatiently. Behind Grace, other customers shifted, annoyed. Grace watched the young woman's face redden with embarrassment. Saw her start to put items back. Saw her fighting tears. "Excuse me," Grace said gently. "How much is she short?" 2,000 naira, the cashier said. Grace pulled bills from her wallet. "I'll cover it." The young woman turned, shocked. "No, I couldn't. Please. Let me." Grace pressed the money into her hand. "Everyone needs help sometimes. There's no shame in it. But I don't even know you. You don't need to." Grace smiled. "Just promise me that when you're able, you'll help someone else. Pass it forward." The young woman nodded, crying now. "Thank you. Thank you so much." As Grace walked out of the store, Emmanuel babbling happily about the trucks in the parking lot, she felt Daniel's words echo in her mind. Remember to be the help you needed. She was doing exactly that. And it felt like the best kind of victory. Later that week, Grace attended a university function where she'd been invited to speak about her research. In the audience, she spotted a familiar face. Victoria Okonkwo sat in the back row alone. After the presentation, as people congratulated Grace, she saw Victoria slip toward the exit. On impulse, Grace followed. "Mrs. Okonkwo." Victoria turned, her face pale. "Ms. Adeyemi, your presentation was very good." "Thank you." Grace studied her. Victoria looked different. Smaller, somehow. Less armored. I heard you've been volunteering at a women's shelter. Ah, yes. I wanted to do something useful. Something real. Victoria's voice was quiet. I owe you an apology. A real one, not just words. What I did was unforgivable. But not unforgivable to forgive, Grace said gently. If you're genuinely trying to change. I am. I don't expect you to believe me, but I am. Victoria looked down. I was so afraid of being that poor girl again that I forgot how to be a decent human. You didn't deserve what I did to you. Grace was silent for a moment. Then, neither did you. Deserve whatever made you so afraid. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. We all have our stories, Grace continued. Our pain. The question is what we do with it. Let it make us cruel, or let it make us compassionate. She extended her hand. Thank you for the apology. I accept it. Victoria shook her hand, and something in her face shifted. Relief. Release. The beginning of redemption. 3 years after that day in Savamart, Grace stood in the courtyard of her foundation's new building. The Hope Rising initiative now helped 50 single mothers annually with childcare, tuition assistance, and job training. Emmanuel, now 4 years old, played with other children in the garden while their mothers attended classes inside. Daniel arrived with his mother, Patience Chakwu, who'd insisted on seeing Grace's work firsthand. The older woman walked through the facility with tears in her eyes, hugging mothers and praising Grace's vision. This is what my son saw in you, Patience told Grace. This heart for others. This refusal to become bitter despite hardship. I learned from the best, Grace replied, looking at Daniel. From people who helped me when I needed it most. That evening, the three of them sat in Grace's home. No longer a single room, but a royal house Daniel had helped her buy, sharing a meal. Emmanuel called Daniel Uncle Dan, and Patience Grandma Patience. They were family now, not by blood but by choice. Do you ever think about that day? Daniel asked. In Savamart. Every day, Grace admitted. But not with pain anymore. With gratitude. Gratitude. Because it led me here. To this work. To you. To understanding that struggle can break us or build us, depending on what we do with it. She looked at Emmanuel playing with his toys. I want him to grow up knowing that kindness is strength. That helping others isn't weakness. That dignity doesn't come from what you have, but who you are. Daniel raised his glass. To dignity. And to the woman who taught me that wealth means nothing if you don't use it to lift others. They toasted, the clink of glasses soft in the warm evening. Outside, Lagos hummed with its endless energy. Millions of stories unfolding. Millions of struggles and small victories. Millions of chances for cruelty or kindness. Grace Adeyemi was no longer the desperate young woman crying on a bus stop bench. She was a master's graduate, a professor, a foundation director, a mother, and a force for change. And her story became a beacon of hope for struggling mothers everywhere. Proof that sometimes the cure we need does not come from money or power, but from unexpected friendship, quiet acts of kindness, and the resilience that refuses to let cruelty have the final word. Because in the end, dignity isn't purchased. It's practiced. And true wealth is measured not in what you possess, but in what you give away.